Boxing is brutal, but despite the blood and the bruises, even the losers always pick themselves up off the mat and walk out of the ring. Well, not always. Though rare, a small handful of boxers die in the ring each year. These horrifying occurrences always generate at least some press, but one instance stands out above the rest. November 18th, 1982 in Las Vegas, Nevada is a time and place that will forever live in infamy. That's when the most shocking death in the history of the sport took place, in front of thousands of spectators. Sit back and buckle your seatbelt. This is the nightmare-inducing story of Kim Duk-koo. Kim Duk-koo. Kim Duk-koo was a South Korean lightweight. By 1982, he was 27 years old and had been fighting for half a decade. He had a 17-win, 1-loss, 1-draw record. 8 of those wins were by knockout, and he'd won the Oriental and Pacific Boxing Federation title earlier in the year. Though he'd never fought outside of his home country, Kim had earned the right to fly to the United States and make his international debut. He was scheduled to face off against Ray Mancini at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas on November 13th. When he left, he said goodbye to his fiancée, who was pregnant with their son. Kim Duk-koo wasn't only fighting for himself, he was fighting for the chance to support his family and build a life for them. Ray Mancini. Kim may have earned a reputation as one of the best in South Korea, but he was headed to the epicenter of elite boxing, and he was up against a future Hall of Famer at his physical prime. Ray Mancini was the son of Lenny Mancini, who had also been a professional boxer and had received the Purple Heart during World War II. Toughness was in Ray Mancini's blood, and it showed on his record. Just a few months earlier, Mancini won the World Boxing Association lightweight title. He'd beaten Arturo Frias in the first round, thanks to his signature style: fast, aggressive, unrelenting. Now the reigning champ was a fan favorite among his home crowd. He was also heavily favored to win. Duk-koo was still virtually unknown in America at the time. That said, he wasn't unknown to Mancini. Mancini had been following South Korean press leading up to the fight, and he read something that caught his attention. Amid a throng of reporters at Gimpo International Airport as he was leaving for Vegas, Kim Duk-koo had reportedly told his wife, "Either he dies or I die." These were words that would later echo hauntingly in the annals of boxing history. The statement stood out Mancini, who realized there might be a lot more to the 27-year-old South Korean than what was on the surface. And indeed, there was. A child born in hell. Kim Duk-koo had risen to stardom from circumstances as unlikely as they were brutal and violent. When he was just 2 years old, he and his father were both infected with a virus. The toddler managed to survive despite the fact the virus killed his father. Soon, Kim was living under a stepfather whose eldest son was physically abusive. Eventually, he and his mother fled, with his mother carrying their few possessions on her head. They fled to the small fishing village of Banam, just a few miles south of the border with North Korea. They were so poor his mother had to beg for food on the street. His mother later remarried, making Kim the youngest child in a new family that spent almost all their time hunting and fishing, often in frigid conditions. By the time Duk-koo was old enough to start attending school, he'd already endured more toil and trouble than many ever do, but school only made things more horrible. Duk-koo was frequently disciplined, often in humiliating ways by his teachers. For example, when he got in trouble, they would pin a sign on his shirt and make him march around the school, to the ridicule of his classmates. And indeed, his classmates were often the reason why Duk-koo got in trouble in the first place. He struggled to get along with his peers and fought often, even though Duk-koo would later say he was often coerced into these fights by other kids, including one of his older brothers. Interestingly, although Duk-koo never admitted as much, this suggests that even as an untrained kid, he was a fighter worth watching. By the time he was a teenager, Duk-koo had had enough. He ran away from home and ended up in Seoul, where lived under a bridge. He managed to avoid starvation by working odd jobs, everything from welding to peddling goods like books and pens. Seeking an outlet for his pent-up frustration, the homeless teen eventually walked into a local boxing gym called Dong-ah, run by a former fighter named Hyun-chi Kim. Initially unimpressed, Hyun-chi Kim realized Kim Duk-koo was special when he hit the teenager for the first time. Most teenagers would be stunned or upset. Kim Duk-koo was pleased. "Poverty is my teacher," he would later say. For Duk-koo, getting punched in the face was just life treating him as usual. The day of the fight. Kim Duk-koo had crawled his way out of the worst of circumstances to become a decorated professional fighter in Korea. Fighting in the US was a different animal, but Ray Mancini recognized something in Duk-koo that others around him hadn't. Duk-koo was absolutely fearless. American reporters were surprised when Mancini told them he didn't expect the fight with Duk-koo to be a walk in the park. "We're gonna have a war, no doubt about it," he said. The public was largely dismissive of Mancini's statement at the time. To them, it seemed like he was just trying to stir up excitement, but even Mancini could not have known how true his words would prove to be. The fight was scheduled to take place in a brand new 10,000-seat outdoor arena at Caesar's Palace on the Las Vegas Strip. While Duk-koo steeled his resolve in solitude, Ray Mancini lived it up in glamorous fashion. That evening, he went to dinner with none other than Frank Sinatra, who was such a fan of Mancini he offered for him to come to his concert after the fight, which Sinatra was clearly assuming Mancini would easily win. As the desert sun went down that night, the stands in the outdoor arena began to fill. Duk-koo entered the ring, followed by Mancini, and then the bell went off. The fight. Kim Duk-koo wasted no time in surprising the audience. He immediately came across the ring and struck Mancini, landing a straight left on his chin. Moments after that, he landed another left, this time on Mancini's chest. Rattled, Mancini went into defensive mode, but as Duk-koo soon discovered, Mancini shared his ability to take punches without backing down. As the two men continued to stand toe-to-toe and exchange blows, it became clear they were in for a much longer and harder fight than most had expected. Both men had remarkable stamina, but Mancini was more experienced than Duk-koo in ultra-long fights. 3 times in his career, he had already endured fights that had gone on into the 15th round. By contrast, Duk-koo had never been in a 15-round fight, yet despite this, Duk-koo was fighting so well and so ferociously that Mancini would later admit he almost thought about quitting. Duk-koo split Mancini's left ear open and struck his left eye so hard that it would eventually be swollen completely shut. Mancini also injured his left hand, which began swelling severely. But neither man backed down. The fight wore on into the 5th round, then the 7th, the 10th. It seemed the bout would never end, but those who were paying careful attention noticed that Mancini was ever so slightly starting to pull ahead. By the time the rounds had reached double digits, Mancini was consistently landing more punches than Duk-koo. By the start of the 11th round, both men's faces were a different shape and color than when they'd started. In that round, Mancini managed to buckle Duk-koo's knees, which ignited a roar in the crowd, but Duk-koo recovered and fought on. In the 13th round, Mancini seemed to switch into another gear. He pummeled Kim Duk-koo with nearly 40 punches, a blizzard that had everyone on the edge of their seat, convinced the fight was soon to be over. But the Korean runaway who had fought his way through abuse and homelessness was simply impossible to break. After seeing Mancini come at Duk-koo with everything he had in the 13th round, and Duk-koo still standing at the end of the round, commentators and spectators alike began to think the unthinkable. Kim Duk-koo might win this fight. The deadly blow. For the first time in Duk-koo's career, and only the 5th time in Mancini's, the fight entered the 14th round. But at last, this round would be much shorter than all the previous. Right at the beginning of the round, Mancini surprised the exhausted Duk-koo with a step to the right and a powerful right hook. This sent Duk-koo a couple paces backward, and that's when it happened. Mancini landed the punch that would change his life and the history of professional boxing forever. Mancini crushed Duk-koo with a straight right to the face. Duk-koo tumbled backward, landing with a thud against the ropes. The crowd roared. It had all the appearances of a decisive knockout, but Duk-koo was still conscious and began scrambling to pull himself back up by the ropes. In a moment that sports journalist Ralph Wiley would later describe as one of the greatest physical feats he had ever witnessed, Kim Duk-koo managed to drag himself along the ropes and return to his feet. The crowd roared anew, but the referee ultimately took a look at the wobbling, stunned Duk-koo and ended the fight. Mancini was crowned the winner by technical knockout. Spectators clapped their hands raw, assuming that the incredible drama of this 14-round brawl was finally over. But in fact, the most dramatic moment of all came next. Just minutes after regaining his footing, the still unsteady Duk-koo suddenly collapsed onto the canvas. His training staff and emergency personnel were shocked to find the 27-year-old unconscious, and worse, unwakeable. He still had a pulse and was still breathing. In a hurry, they placed Duk-koo on a stretcher and rushed him out of the arena. The crowd of 10,000 was silent. Mancini forgot all about the victory he just won and quietly prayed for Duk-koo. Duk-koo was taken to the emergency room at Desert Springs Hospital, just 3 miles down the strip from Caesar's Palace. Doctors there discovered Duk-koo had a massive subdural hematoma. This meant that 100 milliliters of blood had flooded his brain. There was little doubt it had been caused by the fight-ending blow Duk-koo had taken at the start of the 14th round. Subdural hematomas can be life-threatening. Doctors worked tirelessly but were unable to save Duk-koo from his fate. 5 days later, Kim Duk-koo passed away in the hospital, having never regained consciousness. The aftermath. This shocking tragedy had a profound effect on the world of boxing. Duk-koo's wife and newborn baby were now without a father, all because of a legal, properly regulated boxing match. Thousands had seen the tragedy live. Countless more had watched in live on CBS. In light of the event, the World Boxing Association and the World Boxing Council both reduced the round limit from 15 to 12. New standards were also implemented for pre-fight medical checks, including heart, brain, and lung examinations. Duk-koo's mother was bereft after the event. Heartbreakingly, she died by suicide 3 months later. She wasn't the only one. Richard Green, the fight's referee, also died by suicide the following year. Another person deeply traumatized by the event was Ray Mancini, who blamed himself for what had happened. He fell into a deep depression, but eventually returned to fighting and defended his title 2 more times before retiring in 1992. Mancini was later relieved to learn that despite being devastated by their loss, Duk-koo's wife and child had gone on to build a successful life. Duk-koo's son, who Duk-koo never met, went on to become a dentist. In 2011, Mancini met the family while filming a documentary. It may have been the one ray of light amid an otherwise very bleak chapter in boxing history. The night after the fight, hotel staff cleaning the room in Las Vegas, which Kim Duk-koo had stayed, found a message he had written on a lampshade. It was just 3 words: live or die.